Professional killer found his brother after 20 years, but he was hired to kill him. The rain hammered against the windows of the abandoned warehouse in downtown Seattle as Marcus Vale studied the photograph on his secure laptop. The target was always just a face to him, a problem to be solved, a contract to be fulfilled. But this photograph made his blood run cold. David Chen, 42, CEO of NeuralLink Technologies. The contract was worth $3 million, the highest payout Marcus had received in his 15-year career as a professional assassin. The client had been specific. It had to look like an accident, no traces, complete elimination. But the face staring back at him from the screen was one he hadn't seen in 20 years. Marcus's hands trembled as he zoomed in on the photograph. The jawline, the distinctive scar above the left eyebrow, the way David's mouth curved slightly when he smiled. It was older, weathered by success and stress, but it was unmistakable. This was Danny. His little brother Danny, who had disappeared from the foster system when Marcus was 18 and Danny was 16. The brother he'd spent years searching for before his life took a dark turn into the world of contract killing. Marcus closed the laptop and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights blurred by rain. He remembered the last time he'd seen Danny, a scared kid being transferred to another foster home while Marcus aged out of the system. They'd promised to find each other, to stay in touch, but the system had swallowed Danny whole. Now, 20 years later, Marcus had found him, and he'd been hired to kill him. The next morning, Marcus began surveillance of David Chen, but this time it wasn't to plan an assassination. He needed to be absolutely certain. He watched David leave his downtown condo, noting the way he walked with a slight limp in his left leg, the same limp Danny had developed after breaking it in 3 places when they were kids. During lunch, Marcus observed David from across the street at a cafe. When David absently touched the scar above his eyebrow while thinking, Marcus felt his chest tighten. That scar had come from Marcus accidentally hitting Danny with a baseball bat during a game of catch in their 3rd foster home. But Marcus needed absolute proof. That evening, he broke into David's condo with the same skills that made him one of the most sought-after assassins on the West Coast. Inside, he found what he was looking for, a small photo album hidden in the bedroom dresser. The pictures were faded, some water-damaged, but they told the story Marcus needed to hear. There was Danny at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, Danny at 12, serious and studious the way he'd always been, and in the back of the album, a photo that made Marcus's throat close up, the two of them together in their 2nd foster home, Marcus's arm around his little brother's shoulders, both of them trying to smile despite everything they'd been through. On the back of the photo, in Danny's careful handwriting, "Me and Marcus, best brothers forever. D.C. 2004. D.C. David Chen. Danny Chen." He'd kept their foster name. Marcus sat on the floor of his brother's bedroom, holding the photograph, and for the first time in 15 years, he cried. The next morning, Marcus called the number he'd been given for the client. It was answered on the 2nd ring by a voice he didn't recognize. "It's done?" the man asked. "There's been a complication," Marcus said. "What kind of complication?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "I need to know why you want David Chen dead." "That's not your concern. You were hired to do a job." "I'm making it my concern. Why Chen?" The line was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Vale, you have a reputation for completing contracts without questions. That's why we chose you. Don't disappoint us now. Answer my question, or the deal is off." "The deal is not off, Mr. Vale. You took our money. You signed our contract. David Chen dies or you do. Those are your options." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, processing the threat. In 15 years of contract work, he'd never backed out of a job, but he'd also never been hired to kill his own brother. That afternoon, Marcus began researching his anonymous clients. Using contacts in the criminal underworld and skills learned through years of intelligence gathering, he started tracing the money trail. What he found made his blood boil. The contract on David's life had been placed by Omega Industries, a rival technology company that had been trying to acquire NeuralLink for months. David had been refusing their offers, and his company's breakthrough in neural interface technology was worth billions. But the more Marcus dug, the darker the picture became. Omega Industries was a front for a larger criminal organization that specialized in corporate espionage and elimination. They didn't just want David's company. They wanted to eliminate anyone who might continue his work. Marcus realized that killing David wouldn't end his brother's danger. It would just be the beginning of a systematic elimination of everyone associated with NeuralLink Technologies. He made a decision that would change everything. Instead of killing David, Marcus was going to kill everyone who wanted David dead. Over the next week, Marcus used every skill he'd developed as a professional assassin, but this time, he was hunting the hunter. He identified 6 key members of the Omega Industries operation: the CEO who had ordered the hit, the financial backer who was funding it, the tech specialists who planned to steal David's research, and the 3 other assassins who had been hired as backup in case Marcus failed. Marcus started with the other assassins. The first was a man named Viktor Kozlov, a former Spetsnaz operative who favored close-quarters combat. Marcus found him in a hotel room in Pioneer Square, planning his own approach to David. The fight was brief and brutal, ending with Viktor's neck broken and his body positioned to look like a heart attack. The second assassin was Elena Rodriguez, a poisoning specialist who had been preparing to contaminate David's regular coffee shop. Marcus intercepted her in the parking garage beneath her apartment building. She never saw him coming. The third was James Wright, a sniper who had been setting up in a building across from NeuralLink's headquarters. Marcus reached him just as Wright was assembling his rifle. The man fell 20 stories to the street below, another apparent suicide. Each death sent a message back to Omega Industries. Their operation was being compromised. The CEO of Omega Industries, Richard Blackwood, increased his security detail and moved to a safe house outside the city. But Marcus had been tracking his movements for days. He hit the safe house at 3 a.m., eliminating the guards with precision shots before confronting Blackwood in his bedroom. "Who are you?" Blackwood demanded as Marcus stood over him. "Someone who doesn't like people threatening my family," Marcus replied. The financial backer, a man named Harrison Duke, tried to flee the city when news of Blackwood's death reached him. Marcus intercepted his private jet at Boeing Field. Duke's body was found in the jet's cargo hold, apparently crushed by shifting luggage during takeoff. The tech specialists were the most dangerous because they had already begun infiltrating NeuralLink systems. Marcus found them in a rented warehouse in Georgetown, surrounded by stolen data and corporate secrets. He made sure none of them lived to see morning. By the end of the week, the entire Omega Industries operation had been dismantled. Every person who had posed a threat to David Chen was dead. But Marcus had been wounded in the final confrontation at the warehouse. A lucky shot from one of the tech specialists had caught him in the abdomen, and he was losing blood faster than he could control. He managed to drive to an abandoned building in Ballard, one of his old safe houses. As he sat on the concrete floor, back against the wall, Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the last photo he'd taken from David's album, the 2 of them as children, arms around each other, trying to smile. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you," Marcus whispered to the photograph, "but you're safe now, Danny. You're finally safe." Marcus Vale died as the sun rose over Seattle, surrounded by the tools of his trade, but thinking only of the brother he'd protected without ever letting him know. For 3 days, the deaths of multiple criminals and corporate executives dominated the Seattle news. Headlines screamed about gang warfare, corporate espionage gone wrong, and a mysterious vigilante cleaning up the city's underworld. David Chen watched the coverage from his office at NeuralLink, grateful that whatever threat had been hanging over his company seemed to have resolved itself. He had no idea how close death had come or who had died protecting him. It wasn't until the 4th day that everything changed. David was working late in his office when his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Chen, there's a detective here to see you. Says it's about the recent corporate murders." Detective Sarah Morrison entered with a manila folder under her arm. She was a 20-year veteran of Seattle PD, and her expression was grim. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some questions about recent threats against your company." "What kind of threats?" David asked. "We have evidence that Omega Industries had placed a contract on your life. $3 million to have you eliminated." David felt the blood drain from his face. "What? That's impossible. I'm afraid it's very real. We also have evidence that the recent deaths around the city were connected to this contract. Someone systematically eliminated everyone involved in the plot against you." Detective Morrison opened her folder and pulled out a photograph. "This is the man we believe was responsible for protecting you. His name was Marcus Vale, professional assassin, originally hired to kill you, but apparently he changed his mind." She placed the photograph on David's desk. David stared at the image, his world tilting on its axis. The face was older, harder, marked by years of violence and pain. But the eyes, the jawline, the scar above the left eyebrow that he touched absently when thinking, it was all achingly familiar. "Marcus," David whispered. "You knew him?" Detective Morrison asked. David's hand shook as he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the photo album he kept there. With trembling fingers, he found the picture he was looking for. Two young boys in a foster home, arms around each other, trying to smile despite their circumstances. "This is Marcus," David said, his voice breaking. "He's my brother. I haven't seen him in 20 years. Detective Morrison studied both photographs, the young boy trying to smile and the hardened killer who had died, protecting his brother without him ever knowing. "Mr. Chen," she said gently, "I'm sorry to tell you that Marcus Vale died 3 days ago. He was found in an abandoned building in Ballard, apparently from wounds sustained during his final operation against the people who wanted you dead." David closed his eyes, feeling tears start to fall. "He found me," he whispered. "After all these years, he found me. According to our investigation, he turned down a $3 million contract to kill you and instead eliminated everyone who posed a threat to your life. He died protecting you." David looked at the childhood photograph again, remembering the promise they'd made to each other so long ago, that they'd always be brothers, no matter what happened, no matter how far apart life took them. Marcus had kept that promise, even when it cost him everything. That evening, David Chen stood alone in the abandoned building where his brother had died. The police had finished their investigation, but David needed to see the place for himself. He needed to understand how the story had ended. On the concrete floor where Marcus had died, David found something the police had missed, a small, water-stained photograph that had fallen from Marcus's pocket. It was the same picture David kept in his desk, two young boys, arms around each other, trying to smile. On the back in his own childhood handwriting were the words, "Me and Marcus, best brothers forever." David sat on the concrete floor and cried for the brother who had found him after 20 years of searching, who had given his life to protect him, and who had died alone without David ever knowing he was there. But as he sat in that empty building, David made a promise of his own. Marcus's sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. The neural interface technology that David had been developing would be used to help children in the foster system, to make sure that families weren't separated, that brothers and sisters didn't lose each other the way he and Marcus had. It would be called the Marcus Vale Foundation for Lost Families, because sometimes the greatest love is the kind that protects from the shadows, asks for nothing in return, and makes sure that the people who matter most never know how much danger they were in. Marcus had spent 15 years killing for money, but he died saving the person who mattered most, the little brother who had never stopped believing that his big brother would find him someday. And in the end, love proved stronger than death, stronger than time, and stronger than the darkness that had tried to claim them both.